Courtney, what struck me about your interview with Secretary Austin, and I want to play, I know we want to play some more of it, is sometimes he sort of struck me as being in the same position you and I are in, which is I'm not 100% sure what's going on. And at the end of the day, I assume he has more access to this information than you or I do. Is that the impression you got?
One would think so. I mean, we all want the access that he's got, but the reality is he's probably knows a lot more than we do. He didn't deny, he didn't dispute this latest intelligence community leaning towards these last three objects being, as you said, non-threatening in nature, that they were not nefarious, that they were benign. But he didn't say anything more about them. They don't seem to know where they came from, who owns them. He said no one has claimed ownership still to date on them, and they don't really know what their purpose was. Secretary Austin also defended the U.S. military's recommendation to take out these three objects, saying that they presented a potential threat to civilian aviation and that they weren't sure if they may have been surveilling sensitive sites. So that was ultimately what they made the decision. He cited the fact that they were taking the American public's best interest to heart when they made those decisions. But he also acknowledged, Chuck, that none of these balloons or objects presented any kind of an actual threat to Americans on the ground. So we also know now that the U.S., these objects like this, balloons or whatever they are, they may have been flying over U.S. airspace or near U.S. airspace for some time, and the U.S. just didn't know it. The U.S. military radars just weren't honed in enough on smaller objects and slower moving objects like these. So I asked him specifically, now that they're seeing more of these, does this represent some sort of an intelligence failure that they didn't know about them in the past? Here's what he had to say. The fact that the U.S. military didn't know about these until recently, is that an intelligence failure? Was that a military failure?
No, it's how you use your radars. We typically are focused on things that are moving fast, and so it's a bit more difficult to collect on slow-moving objects like a balloon. And as they made adjustments, they were able to see some of that.
So I asked him if the American public has been potentially at danger from these sorts of things for years and just not known it if they've been flying around without the U.S. having to shoot them down. And he referred me to the FAA for that. Chuck?
Well, and that's, I guess I'm going to come back to that before we transition. There seems to be almost an embracing of the compartmentalization aspect of this, right? And I remember after 9/11, we had the whole stovepiping situation. Well, somebody knew this and somebody knew this, but they weren't sharing their data. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of coordination, or at least it's being used as an excuse for why we didn't know these things.
But the truth is there is coordination, especially when you're talking about over North America. The DOD, the FAA, both Canadians and the U.S., they all sit in the same, in some cases, they sit in the same room, and they can coordinate and deconflict. I think the difference here is their radars would often, if they picked up things like these smaller objects, like the one that was shot down over Lake Huron, it was at 20,000 feet, it was smaller, it didn't seem to have any propulsion mechanism or heat signature. They may not have seen that, or if they did, they would maybe assume it was clutter in the past. Now they're paying more attention to these sorts of things. But the question that we just can't get answered is, to what end? Does that mean we're going to see more of these things shot down going forward? Or are they going to be scrambling jets to look at every potential balloon that's flying over the U.S.? And we can't seem to get an answer. I suspect that we're going to hear more about the policy going forward once this review is done.
Ryan, I'm curious. I know the head of the FAA, I think, was testifying today, and it was on a separate topic. We assumed some of this would come up. Did he have much to add to this conversation?
Not beyond the kind of the broad lines that we've gotten from the other agencies. You know, I think there was some confirmation that there was a threat, or perhaps a concern, threat's probably not the right word, about how it could interfere with commercial air traffic and things along those lines. And but in terms of any kind of solid confirmation as to where these objects come from, why the decision was made to shoot them down, and what it could mean for the future, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about that. He was really, you know, the purpose of him being there was to talk more about kind of the situation with airline travel in the United States in general, and that's really what he was pressed on.
I want to foreshadow something. People might be shocked that sometimes some interviews get taped before I come on this hour, and I have an interview with Admiral Stavridis in a few minutes, and he points to an event that we're waiting on to to whether it's going to happen or not. And that event is Speaker McCarthy going to Taiwan. Ryan, what's the latest on that?
Well, Kevin McCarthy won't confirm that he's planning to go to Taiwan. He also won't say that he's definitely not going. So it's one of those things where there have been rumors and reports about it. He certainly is not batting down those questions. When asked about it specifically, he says he has no comment on whether or not he plans to go there. Interestingly enough, Chuck, I was in a briefing with him a couple of weeks ago where he was specifically asked if he was concerned that the Chinese government has made it public that they don't think he should travel to Taiwan. And his answer to that was simply, the Chinese government does not tell me what to do. There's no doubt that Kevin McCarthy wants to appear to have a very bold and defiant stance when it comes to the Chinese Communist government. And he's really found himself in a similar position to Speaker Pelosi. Once it was floated that she might go to Taiwan, if for some reason those plans change, it may put him in a difficult position. So no plans yet, Chuck. If it does happen, it would likely happen later this summer.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'm foreshadowing a moment here that viewers will know why I asked you that question now. Ryan, thank you for that. Courtney, let's stick around a minute because you also spoke to Secretary Austin about the status of the war in Ukraine. And I want to let our viewers hear a bit of that part of your interview. Here's a chunk of it.
So you feel confident that in the coming months, maybe by the end of this year even, that Ukraine and Russia will come to a negotiating table to talk?
Courtney, I've done enough fighting to know that you should never predict an outcome of a fight, but what you should do is do everything that you can to shape the fight so that there is a possibility of success. And we think we're going to do that. We're going to give the Ukrainians everything that they need to be successful and to hopefully change the dynamics on the battlefield. That's what we're looking to do. But whether or not how things unfold is left to be seen. I think at the end of the day, we're going to find that the Ukrainians are pretty good fighters. That the reason that they did well at the beginning of this war is because we had spent time training them, training their soldiers, their non-commissioned officers since 2014, and we saw some of their NCOs exercising initiative, doing things to attack the Russian formations in asymmetric fashion early on, and that had really, really good effects. So the training that we're providing now on the platforms. The maneuver training the combined arms training that we're going to provide them, I think is going to pay dividend. Now, how it shapes up, we'll see.
Courtney, that was an incredibly detailed answer he gave to you about a war that he made clear we're not fighting. Right at the beginning of your first question on Ukraine, I didn't include that part in there. He said, unprovoked, unprompted, by the way, we're not having a war with Russia. Ukraine's fighting Russia. And then he walks you through all of that. I guess the point that he seemed to want to drive home and you picked up on clearly, and what other U.S. officials are saying is, this war can't last another year. We're not going to say it that way, but it can't last another year. Right, Ukraine? Like, that does seem to be the general push American officials are trying to give here, right?
I mean, that's every indication is leading in that direction, right? There is so much emphasis on this coming Ukrainian counteroffensive. So preparing them to defend against the Russian offensive and then preparing them for their own counteroffensive. And the clear goal here is to front load as much equipment and weapons as the U.S. and the allies can provide them so that they'll be in a good position and they can put Russia on their back heels, maybe even break through some of the Russian lines, particularly down in the south and the southeast, so that maybe they can force Russia to the negotiating table. But it's important to point out, Chuck, that neither side is showing any interest in negotiating at this point, despite the fact that the U.S. has said repeatedly that there's not going to be a military solution here. This has to end at the table, at the diplomacy table. So every indication is that they are really putting a lot into this offensive and counteroffensive with the hope that it may yield some sort of a diplomatic outcome.
I thought what was interesting there, Courtney, is you offered him the off-ramp of saying, boy, we could be in the same spot here a year from now for the second anniversary. And it was like everything he could say is like, he didn't quite say, it seemed like we better not be here. I mean, it seemed to be all but saying that.
Yeah. And I specifically asked him that. I said, so do you think that this means that by the end of this year, there won't be a war? Because I got to tell you, Chuck, for the past couple of months, the one thing I keep hearing from defense officials and administration officials is that the front lines aren't moving much, and they're not, and they don't see big dramatic changes in how things are going on the war, and they're concerned that a year from now or 2 years from now, the war won't have changed that much. So the lines may move here and there, but there's still going to be this conflict where both sides are dug in, and it's just a matter of where the heavy fighting is occurring across those front lines. So the fact that Secretary Austin seems to think that it may not still be going on a year from now is pretty telling.
Well, he certainly believes it certainly means he has a lot of confidence in this coming spring offensive. I guess we're all going to find out where things stand when summer begins.
Yeah.
Courtney Kube, in one of the more underrated cities in the world, in Brussels, doing a lot of work, obviously.
Yeah.
Courtney, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.